Well, y'all, I just passed my private pilot check ride, and for those of you who are working towards your own, I'm going to show you what I did to prepare. I felt very comfortable, very prepared all along the way, from the written to the oral, the check ride. I was joking with the examiner on the check ride when we were coming in for our first landing. Everything was really good, and I used some paid resources, some free resources. I've got video of almost the entire check ride. I've wrote down all the questions he asked me in the oral, and so I'm going to show you all the tips that I came up with along the way and hopefully make it real easy. So let's jump right in. All right, for the written test, I think it all starts logically here with the written test prep book that you get with all your study materials. I went through this book forward and backwards, making sure that I understood all the information. You don't want to just memorize conditions and situations. You want to be sure you understand the information. And that took me a while for subjects like density, altitude, and things like that you really got to understand. And so I used a lot of these other books to just supplement, using some online resources, just YouTube videos, Jason Shepard's stuff at MZeroA. Just pack in as much as you can to understand the information. Once you understand it, you can explain it and get any questions. So the most valuable resource I got for preparing for the written test were the free practice tests that are available at King Schools, and I'll put the link to that in the description. There they have randomized full 60 question, hour-and-a-half or 2-hour tests that you can take unlimited times, and you get scored on them. So I probably took 20 to 30 of those full 60 question, hour-and-a-half practice tests in order to get ready. I scored as low as 60 in the beginning when I was first starting, and I scored as high as 93 by the time I felt like I was ready to take the written. And when I took the actual written test, I came out with a 97. And because of that high score on the written, I had multiple instructors tell me they felt like my oral exam would be substantially shorter, and it was. It only lasted about an hour. So I came home and I wrote down all the questions that he asked me in the oral exam, and let's jump into that. So just like with the written exam, the key to the oral exam is preparation. For that, I used two main resources. One, this private pilot oral exam guide. Went through that a number of times, number of ways, highlighting some things. There's some good information in there. The other thing I did was listen to Jason Shepard's audio book, How to Pass Your Private Pilot Check Ride. Just had that on in the car while I was driving around. I listened to that a number of times all the way through. So that was very valuable. Also, again, some of the videos that are out on Jason's site and other people's site, all that stuff was very helpful and helped me understand a lot of things, a lot of concepts. Now, closer to the check ride, I set up a mock oral exam with another instructor. That was really key for me to help me verbalize a lot of things, help me understand I had some weaknesses there that I needed to work on. It's not enough to know it. You got to be able to get it out and put it out in your own words in a way when he asks you a question. So that was key for me. You don't want to be in the oral exam trying to stumble over answers or BS your way through things. They're going to pick up on that, and that's only going to hurt your cause. Another great tip I got for the oral exam was this: when the examiner asks you a question, answer it and shut up. So the day of the check ride, my instructor and I flew into the airport, a little small airport, and it's got a conference room area over on the right. We go into the room and we meet the examiner. And while there, they sit down and they start doing some things with the logbooks of the planes, and he asked for my logbook. I gave him that. He's going through doing some of his paperwork on his computer. The instructor is, the examiner. While they're doing all that stuff, I'm not really needed for that, so I'm getting ready. I've got my space here at the table, and I'm setting out my charts, my checklist, my books. Bring everything that you've got with you. Bring it all. Lay it out there where it's easy, quick reference. This is all open book stuff he's going to be asking you, or she. And so, yeah, you've got everything you need to reference so that you don't have to go fumbling and digging around looking for something. I wanted to make sure I had everything ready. My instructor left the room, and the examiner began the exam officially. He handed me back my logbook, and he asked what if we were required to have this to fly or log hours. I said no. He said, what might we want to log to maintain currency? And I said the landings. He asked about what documents we were required to have in the plane before we fly, so I referenced the AERO acronym and explained each one. He passed me the airframe logbook and asked me to verify when the last 100-hour inspection was. I flipped to that tab, referenced that, same for the transponder. He asked if we go out to the plane and the position lights aren't working, can we fly? I couldn't remember off the top of my head, so I picked out my FAR aim. I flipped right over to the VFR minimum equipment. I didn't see it referenced there right off, So then I just picked up my folder where I've got all kinds of crazy notes and acronyms all scribbled out over there to help me remember them. And I've got the A Tomato Flames right here, and I looked through there. I didn't see it there, and then I looked to the VFR night and realized that it was anti-collision lights and position lights are only required for VFR night flight. Boom, there was my answer. Easy enough. We talked about the fuel system in the plane, what power system is supplying the flaps, if we still have flaps, if we lose the engine, things like that. He asked me if a fuel truck comes out to the plane, what we should look for, and I said 100 LL. He asked what color that was. I said blue. He asked me what the gray circle was around Wilmington, and that's the TRSA. He asked me some other airspace questions and things for me to define or point out, like the MOA that's on my route, ways of finding out if it's active, if we can fly through it. The restricted area, the Class D around Shaw Air Force Base, the B around Charlotte, the magenta shaded areas for E and then G, and finding out appropriate frequencies for a tower, approach, and where we needed the transponder. He asked about visibility and cloud clearance requirements for C, B, and E. He pointed out a non-congested area on the chart and asked how high I could fly over that, and I said 500 feet. Then he asked about how I planned my cross-country route, so I took out my plotter and showed him how I came up with the course and the nav log, all the information on the nav log, wind correction angle, all those kinds of things. He asked me how I came up with my gallons per hour, and I pointed that out from a performance chart. We looked over the weight and balance, and he asked about how changes to the CG affect stability and what factors affect stall speed. He asked about different ways to get weather information. I referenced the ForeFlight, the aviationweather.gov site, and then I like to use the WX brief to be able to actually talk to a human. He asked what to look out for if temperature and dew point become close, and then different ways that fog forms. He asked about how to tell if there's fuel at the airport, and I pointed out the little tick marks around the airport symbol. He asked about what I'd do if a low voltage light came on, so I pulled out my emergency checklist and went through my low voltage checklist. Simple as that. He asked about how to recover from a spin, and I referenced the PAIR acronym. And he asked about light signals, both on the ground and in the air. And I'm horrible with light signals, so I've got it on my checklist. So I just flipped over. He asked me what a steady green was in the air versus on the ground. And so I just looked at it, referenced it, gave him the answer. Easy. He asked about what I might do differently if I was coming in for a landing and the winds were coming straight down the runway, but at about 20 knots. I told him I'd reduce my flaps to come in a little faster. And that was pretty much the bulk of the oral exam. I'm sure I forgot a few things, but that was most of it. So it was pretty simple. All right, so after the oral exam, we went out and did pre-flight on the plane and got in and started off with our just a normal takeoff. Here it is, nothing too interesting to see, but power up right there. And drifted off a little to the left there as I started to rotate, but no big deal. And we were heading up to 5,500, but the clouds were a little bit low. So we ended up coming down to around 3,500 ultimately. On the way down, as we were making those adjustments, I got a little bit off of my heading so much that he had to ask me what direction we were headed, and I corrected that and got back on heading, back on altitude, and we were all good. Now, once we got past our first couple of waypoints on the nav log, he pointed out VOR on the chart and said, let's go there. Now, we were currently heading about 099, and that VOR was about roughly to the northeast. So I just turned to roughly 060 to get headed roughly in the right direction, and then I dial up the VOR and fine-tune the heading from there. So I'm on 060, I tune in the VOR, and turn the dial to center it up, and boom, it's right on 060. So my altitude got about 100 feet low at one point while I was reading the chart, but I identified it and corrected it. And then we broke off that route and started some maneuvers. Do not forget your clearing turns. My instructor burned that into my brain. You do not want to fail because you forgot a clearing turn. All right, so we started with slow flight. There's not much to see there on video. So here we are coming out of slow flight and then into the power off stall. After that, we recovered and did the power on stall. This little plane wants to fly, and we were very nose high. Afterwards, the examiner said he thought we were surely going to spin. And next up was steep turns. Turn from the left back into the right. They do allow you to kind of reset there, and you don't have to go right back into it, but I was accustomed to going right into the next turn, so I just did it that way. Then we did a mock engine failure. Of course, this is all about the ABCs of an emergency. So the first thing I did was establish best glide for airspeed and then get it trimmed out so I could focus on the rest of the task. And there was no shortage of good open fields, making for a simple setup for an emergency landing. Recovered back to 1,500 for turns around a point. Here you can see I'm using a cell tower just off the left of the nose. We climbed up to 3,000 feet, and then here we are doing an emergency descent. returned to the airport for a normal landing. And here's where I was kind of joking around with him as we were coming in. Had such a nice, stable approach. I was thinking to myself, man, I sure would like to have this for my short field landing. I asked him if he wanted to make it a short field landing, and he laughed and said, no, most people don't do real well when he tries to give them a short field right off the bat. Although I was fine with it in this case because I was wanting to get it out of the way. But anyway, the normal landing was fine. We taxied back, and next was the short field takeoff. All right, here's our short field takeoff. Flaps at 10 degrees, standing on the brakes, get the engine going, release the brakes. And just pop up off the ground and pitch immediately for that VX. Over the obstacle, drop the flaps, and pitch to VY. And then we did some work with the foggles, turns and climbs, and nothing really to see there. And then here's the first unusual attitude recovery. Did one more after that. I enjoy doing those unusual attitude recoveries. My short field landings have been one of my worst maneuvers, but I've been practicing a lot and I felt real good about it with a good setup and approach. And while we were on the downwind, he asked how I like to aim, and I told him my typical plan was to aim for the third stripe and then put it down within the 1,000 foot markers. I ended up a little bit unintentionally low on final and had to add power over the threshold, and then drug it in over the third stripe and put it down gently right in the middle of the 1,000 foot markers. Probably the smoothest short field touchdown I've done. Then we did our soft field takeoff, and then the GoPro battery died. All right, here's our soft field takeoff. He told me that the soft field would begin at the hold short line, so I immediately, once we got to that line and started crossing it, I added the back pressure to keep the weight off of that nose wheel. And then don't stop on the runway, just keep that turn gradual and moving. Pop right off the runway. I keep it in ground effect to keep building up that airspeed, and just start climbing out. I think after that we came in, he had me do a slip to a landing, which was kind of ugly. I hadn't practiced that a lot, but it was functional, and I turned it into a fine approach, and then we did a go around out of that. The soft field landing was last and was probably my worst landing of the day. It's usually my best, but for some reason it was just no good that day. I hit kind of hard on the mains, and I bounced a little bit. I almost went around after that, but I added a little power to kind of soften the landing and came back down and just fixed it. So I think you could tell I was comfortable. I wasn't freaking out or anything. My patterns were all pretty good. At one point there was another plane in the pattern that caused me to have to extend my downwind at some point, but I handled it fine. And I was told a lot of times they like to try to distract you, drop a pin in the cabin and ask you to pick it up, hoping that you're, seeing if you're going to fall for that. And he never tried to distract me. I think maybe because At some point, it seemed like while we were maybe on our initial climb out, my checklist slid down off of my knee into the floor, and I didn't reach down for it or try to fumble around for it. I just waited for a better opportunity. I imagine maybe he saw that and then realized that I wasn't going to fall for some distracting thing. So that's pretty much it. I hope this helps you. Feel free to leave any comments or questions, and good luck.